When people discuss the worst American generals of World War II, one name repeatedly appears near the top of the list: Lloyd Fredendall. While many commanders made mistakes under the pressure of war, Fredendall's failures were so severe that some historians argue he directly contributed to one of the most embarrassing defeats in American military history. The question is simple: how does a man rise to the rank of general and then perform so poorly when it matters most? In early 1943, American troops were facing the German army in North Africa. These young soldiers were inexperienced but eager to prove themselves. They needed strong leadership. They needed a commander who could inspire confidence, coordinate defenses, and make clear decisions under pressure. Instead, they got Lloyd Fredendall. One of the most common criticisms of Fredendall was his complete disconnect from the battlefield. While his men faced danger on the front lines, Fredendall chose to establish his headquarters nearly 70 miles behind the fighting. Even worse, he ordered an enormous underground bunker complex to be built for his own protection. Think about that for a moment. While ordinary soldiers risked their lives every day, their commander was hiding in a fortified headquarters far from enemy fire. Many officers believed he had little understanding of what was actually happening at the front because he rarely visited it. Leadership in war often depends on trust. Soldiers need to believe their commander shares their risks. But how could they trust a general who seemed more concerned with protecting himself than understanding the reality of combat? Fredendall's communication style made matters even worse. Rather than issuing simple, direct orders, he frequently used confusing language and strange code words. Subordinates often struggled to understand exactly what he wanted. In war, confusion costs lives. Imagine receiving orders that are unclear while enemy tanks are approaching your position. Every minute wasted trying to interpret a command can mean disaster. Critics argue that Fredendall created exactly this kind of chaos. His defenders claim he was dealing with inexperienced troops and difficult conditions. That's true, but isn't that exactly when great leadership matters most? Difficult circumstances do not excuse poor leadership, they reveal it. As American forces prepared to face the Germans, many warning signs were already visible. Yet Fredendall seemed unable or unwilling to recognize the weaknesses in his defensive positions. His units were spread too far apart, making mutual support difficult when the attack finally came. The stage was set for catastrophe, and soon, catastrophe would arrive at a place called Kasserine Pass. Was Lloyd Fredendall simply overwhelmed by circumstances, or was he fundamentally unqualified for the command he had been given? The answer remains one of the most controversial debates in American military history. By February 1943, the moment of truth had arrived. The German army, led in part by the legendary Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, was preparing a major offensive against American positions in Tunisia. American troops were inexperienced, but they were not cowards. Many were willing to fight and die if necessary. What they desperately needed was competent leadership. Instead, they entered one of the most important battles of their early war experience under Lloyd Fredendall. One of Fredendall's biggest mistakes was the way he positioned his forces. Rather than concentrating troops where they could support each other, he scattered units across a vast area. Individual positions were often isolated and vulnerable. Military strategy has long emphasized a simple principle: concentration of force. When your enemy attacks, you want your units close enough to reinforce one another. Fredendall ignored this principle. The result was predictable. When German armored forces struck, American positions were attacked one by one. Instead of facing a united defense, the Germans encountered isolated pockets of resistance that could be overwhelmed separately. Many officers on the ground recognized the danger. Some warned that the defenses were too spread out. Some requested changes. Yet little was done. As the battle intensified, another major weakness became clear: Fredendall's inability to maintain effective command and control. From his distant headquarters, he often lacked an accurate picture of what was happening. Reports were delayed. Communications became confused. Frontline commanders needed quick decisions, but the chain of command struggled to respond. A battlefield can change in minutes. A commander who is too far away may be making decisions based on information that is already outdated. Critics argue that this is exactly what happened at Kasserine Pass. Meanwhile, German commanders demonstrated flexibility and aggression. They identified weak points, exploited gaps, and kept pressure on American forces. While the Germans adapted rapidly, the American response often appeared slow and disorganized. The consequences were severe. American units were forced to retreat. Equipment was abandoned. Hundreds of soldiers were killed, wounded, or captured. For a nation that had recently entered the war, the defeat was a shocking wake-up call. Many historians argue that Kasserine Pass was more than just a military setback. It was a leadership failure. Of course, Fredendall was not the only person responsible. American troops lacked combat experience. German forces were highly skilled veterans. The battlefield situation was complicated. But critics ask an uncomfortable question. If a general cannot prepare his troops, cannot organize an effective defense, cannot communicate clearly, and cannot respond effectively during a crisis, then what exactly is his role? Perhaps the most damaging criticism of Fredendall is that many of the problems seen at Kasserine Pass were not unexpected. Warning signs existed long before the battle began, yet he either failed to recognize them or failed to act. By the end of the battle, confidence in his leadership had collapsed. Senior Allied commanders were losing patience. And soon, one of the most powerful men in the Allied war effort would make a decision that would permanently define Lloyd Fredendall's legacy. Dwight Eisenhower was watching, and Fredendall's days in command were numbered. After the disaster at Kasserine Pass, criticism of Lloyd Fredendall became impossible to ignore. The defeat itself was painful enough, but what angered many officers was the belief that countless problems could have been avoided. The issue was no longer whether mistakes had been made. Every commander makes mistakes in war. The real question was whether Fredendall's leadership had become a liability to the very soldiers he was supposed to protect. One of the most serious accusations against Fredendall was that he failed to earn the confidence of his own officers. Great military leaders inspire trust. Their subordinates believe in their judgment, even during difficult moments. But numerous accounts from officers who served under Fredendall suggest the opposite. Many were frustrated by his leadership style and questioned his decisions. Imagine being a battalion commander fighting for survival while doubting the competence of the man directing the entire operation. That is a dangerous situation for any army. Another criticism focused on Fredendall's apparent unwillingness to visit frontline positions. While commanders are not expected to expose themselves recklessly, many successful generals made regular efforts to understand battlefield conditions firsthand. George Patton did it. Omar Bradley did it. Even German commanders often inspected critical sectors personally. Fredendall, however, developed a reputation for remaining far from the action. Critics argued that this isolation prevented him from understanding what his troops were actually experiencing. And if a commander does not understand reality, how can he make good decisions? Then there was the issue of accountability. After the defeat, many observers felt Fredendall looked for excuses rather than accepting responsibility. Some blamed inexperienced troops. Others pointed to German superiority. Those factors certainly played a role. But leadership means accepting responsibility when things go wrong. Soldiers cannot choose their commanders. Commanders are chosen to lead soldiers. That is why many historians argue that the burden of responsibility ultimately rested with Fredendall. Perhaps the most painful consequence of poor leadership is not lost territory or damaged equipment. It is the human cost. Young American soldiers paid the price for mistakes made far above their level. Many fought bravely despite confusion, poor coordination, and inadequate preparation. Some died. Some were wounded. Some became prisoners of war. Critics argue that these men deserved better leadership than they received. The contrast became even more obvious after Fredendall was removed from command. In March 1943, General Dwight Eisenhower made his decision. Fredendall was relieved and replaced by George S. Patton. The change was dramatic. Patton immediately imposed discipline, improved training, strengthened morale, and demanded higher standards from every level of command. American forces soon began showing significant improvement. This raises a controversial question. If the same soldiers performed better under new leadership, what does that say about the commander who came before? Was Kasserine Pass primarily the result of inexperience? Or was it evidence that the wrong man had been placed in charge at a critical moment? For many historians, the answer is clear. They believe Lloyd Fredendall did not simply lose a battle. He lost the confidence of his army. And in war, that may be the greatest failure of all. More than 80 years after the Battle of Kasserine Pass, Lloyd Fredendall remains one of the most controversial figures in American military history. His name is often included on lists of the worst generals of World War II. Military historians, veterans, and history enthusiasts continue to debate his legacy. Some see him as a symbol of incompetence. Others argue he became a convenient scapegoat for a much larger failure. But let's examine the facts. When Dwight Eisenhower decided to remove Fredendall from command in March 1943, it was an extraordinary move. Generals were not dismissed lightly during wartime. Such decisions could affect morale, political relationships, and military operations. Yet Eisenhower made the choice anyway. Why? Many believe the answer is simple. He had lost confidence in Fredendall's ability to lead. A commander can survive a defeat. Many great generals suffered setbacks during their careers. What often matters most is whether they learn, adapt, and inspire confidence afterward. In Fredendall's case, confidence seemed to be disappearing rather than growing. Supporters of Fredendall offer several arguments in his defense. They point out that American forces in North Africa were inexperienced. This was the first major test against German troops. Mistakes were inevitable. Equipment, doctrine, and training were still evolving. All of that is true, but critics respond with another question. If inexperienced troops needed strong leadership more than ever, doesn't that make Fredendall's failures even more serious? Others argue that the Germans possessed superior battlefield experience. Again, this is true, but wars are rarely fought under perfect conditions. Commanders are judged by how they respond to challenges, not by whether challenges exist. The harsh reality is that many of Fredendall's problems appeared self-inflicted. His distant headquarters, his confusing orders, his poor deployment of forces, his weak battlefield awareness. These criticisms have followed him for decades. Perhaps the most damaging comparison is what happened after he was replaced. Under new leadership, American forces improved rapidly. Officers gained confidence. Training standards increased. Coordination improved. The U.S. Army learned from its mistakes and became a far more effective fighting force. This does not mean Patton was perfect, nor does it mean every problem vanished overnight. But the contrast was difficult to ignore. So was Lloyd Fredendall truly the worst American general of World War II? Some historians say yes. Others argue that title belongs to someone else, and that Fredendall's reputation has become exaggerated over time. Yet even those who defend him rarely describe his command in North Africa as successful. And that may be the most telling point of all. History often remembers great generals for the battles they won. History remembers Lloyd Fredendall for the battle he lost. Today, his legacy serves as a warning that rank alone does not create leadership. Titles do not inspire soldiers. Bunkers do not win battles. Excuses do not erase mistakes. Leadership must be earned. And when the test finally came in North Africa, many believe Lloyd Fredendall failed it. But what do you think? Was Lloyd Fredendall an unfairly blamed commander dealing with impossible circumstances? Or was he one of the greatest leadership failures in American military history? Let me know in the comments.